Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just about 60 seconds here. I'm going to give everyone just a moment to trickle in. Pleasure to have you all here today. All right, welcome to today's webinar, Meeting Dietary Fiber Recommendations in a Latin American Heritage Diet. Just some housekeeping reminders before we move forward. Yes, this session is being recorded. You'll get an email with the video recording and the slides, hopefully by the end of this week. And this email will also have your CPEU certificate, as well as a link to an evaluation to fill out. The recording and slides will also be posted to the Old Ways website. We actually did update our website last week, so the URL is different than the URL you're used to going to. So I can drop this link in the chat as well, but it'll also be in your follow-up email. And then there is no commercial support or funding for this webinar. This is just a fun topic that Sue Ellen and I were really excited to bring to you, and we thought it would be fun to do. So before I allow Sue Ellen to introduce herself and our presenters, I just want to share our learning objectives for today, and you'll get these in your slides as well. And with that, I'll allow our speakers to be introduced. Sue Ellen, could you turn your microphone on so we can hear you?
Thank you for being here today, everyone. My name is Sue Ellen Anderson-Haynes. I'm a registered dietitian. I am a founder of 360 Girls and Women and co-founder of Cultured Health, a digital healthcare app that connects dietitians to clients based on culture. So I'm so excited to present to you Rebeca Stevenson. She's a registered dietitian dedicated to creating freedom from a restrictive mentality surrounding food. She believes you can eat your favorite cultural foods and still be successful in your health journey. She received her undergraduate degree at Johnson & Wales University and Florida International University before moving on to Cedar Crest College, where she earned her graduate degree in nutrition. In addition to her dietetic experience, Rebeca is also a trained chef and prides herself in facilitating cooking demonstrations, training for the health professionals on initiatives, person-centered care, and culturally responsive nutrition. Rebeca is originally from Mexico. She is now living in South Florida with her plant babies. In her free time, you will see her dancing salsa and bachata or finding new local restaurants. And the next speaker we have is Sylvia Klinger. Dr. Klinger is a global nutrition communicator, award-winning author, and nutrition and culinary consultant. She is the founder of Hispanic and Multicultural Nutrition Communications. Her international recognition as a nutrition expert is a testament to her unwavering dedication to helping people, especially those in underserved communities, discover the joy of creating and savoring delicious and nutritious foods. Her recent project in Africa aimed at developing a sustainable community nutrition program for malnourished children is a clear manifestation of her commitment. In October 2022, Loma Linda University acknowledged her dedication by awarding her Women of the Year. Thank you, ladies. You may now begin.
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Sue Ellen. That was very nice. Like it was mentioned earlier, my name is Rebeca Stevenson, and we have a very fun topic for you guys today. And we will also have a little bit of time showing 2 different recipes. So I will start by sharing my screen so we can look at presentation together. Let's go ahead into presenter view. Wonderful. So my emphasis today will be on beans and legumes in Latin American cuisine. And some disclosures before we get started. I do want to share a little bit about my lived experience. I was born and raised in Mexico. I moved to the US as an adult. So I feel like I live in these in-betweens of not being Mexican enough to live in Mexico, but not being American enough to live in the US. And I bring this up because our lived experience does influence our food choices. And if you work with patients that live in this population, it's important that you keep that in mind as well. I was hired by Cultured Health as a consultant to give the presentation today. So those are my disclosures. Going into the objectives, they're similar to what you saw at the beginning. Today we'll really focus on beans and legumes, understanding what beans and legumes are popular in different Latin American countries and Hispanic cuisine. We're going to explore ways to adapt our nutrition care plans and our counseling, especially if we're working with someone from the Latin American population, and we'll develop skills and tools to embrace and honor traditional Latin American cuisine. Now, before we really go into food and all the fun stuff, it's important to lay the groundwork of the population that we're working with. You might have seen these two terms used interchangeably, right? Latino, Latina, Hispanic, Latinx, Latine. So I really wanted to clarify what that means before we go into explaining different kinds of foods. So when we think of Latino, Latina, we think of geographical location. That's Latin America. So as you can see, this includes countries like Brazil, Caribbean islands. When we think of Hispanic, we think of language. And we think of countries that are conquered by Spain that speak the Spanish language. So you'll see there's some overlap, right? There's some countries that are Latin America, but are also considered Hispanic. I also want to talk about two other terms. Latinx is a gender neutral term that was created by English speakers. And then we have Latine, which is a gender neutral term as well, but it was created by the Spanish speaking community. I will use all of these terms interchangeably today, but it's important to understand that the Latino community is filled with so much nuance based on religion, on acculturation. There's just so many factors. So it's always important to ask someone how they prefer to be identified. You never want to assume, and you're already taking the first step, which is educating yourselves and learning more about the culture, so that way we can start to break down barriers when it comes to this community. All right, so getting into the good stuff, which is beans, I want to hear from everyone what Latin American country eats the most beans. And you're going to see a poll pop up. And this is a guessing game. It's fun. If you don't get it right, that's okay. Go ahead and put in your vote of what country do you think eats the most beans. We're going to give maybe 60 seconds to answer this question. Well, I turn this off. Feel like it's a little tough, right? Like it could be any of these countries. Okay, I don't know if we can see how many people have voted in the poll, but we should get the results soon. All right, it was mixed, right? I do see a lot of different results. So this is a surprise to everyone, but according to the 2021 statistics, Brazil is actually one of the countries that eats the most beans. So it was so fun to see the different results there. And again, this is just for fun, but just to open up our perspective to what countries eat the most beans, right? So we're going to go on a tour of different countries, trying to understand what kind of dishes and what foods are popular with Latin American countries. I do want to hear from you. When you think of the term rice and beans, what comes to mind? I want to know if you read it on a menu, if you're cooking it at home, what comes to mind when you think of rice and beans? Do we think of rice and beans together? Do we think of rice and beans separate? Do we think of black beans, of red beans? Do we think of white rice, red rice, brown rice? Let me know in the comments. What comes to mind when you think of rice and beans? Do we think of a particular country? I know someone wrote in the chat Cuban food. So when you think of rice and beans, let me know in the comments, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I see one response of Cuban food. Is that what we think rice and beans come from? Is that what we initially think of rice and beans? Okay, I see comfort food. I love that. Definitely comfort food in a lot of different countries. Brazilian holiday time. Oh, I love that. Rice and beans equal holiday and fun. I wanted to give a couple more seconds, but I love all of these responses. So let's go into what countries in Latin America might have different versions of rice and beans. And in our counseling, it's important that we're sensitive to this, right? Someone might say, oh, I eat rice and beans and their 24-hour recall, but we have to delve deeper, right? What does rice and beans look like for everyone? So I have different countries here. In Costa Rica, it's called gallo pinto, and they might use black or red beans. In Puerto Rico, they might make arroz con gandules, which actually might not even have beans. It might be green pigeon peas, and they might have a different base, right, in the cooking process. When we look at Cuba, that's usually called con gris or moros, depending on what part of Cuba you live. And the seasonings are different, right? It might have pork or cumin. And then when we think of Haiti, they have their own version of rice and beans that might be made with coconut milk or different peppers to season. So when we're approaching this community or we're counseling this community, it's important to even think of the basic staples, rice and beans, how they're so different from country to country, right? So I just wanted to put out this slide because I think it's important that we really delve deeper and we make our counseling really person-centered, because one food might be very different from country to country. Moving forward into different countries, I wanted to present different kinds of beans that maybe we might not have access to here in the US. And I love the frijol rojo de seda, which translates into red silk bean, from Salvador. And they use a lot of beans in different preparations. So we see here on the right, pupusas. It's a very traditional dish from there. And it is made from a corn dough, cheese. They have their own version of greens that goes into this as well. So just to present what kinds of beans are used in this country. Obviously, if I sat here and talked about all the countries and all the different kinds of beans, we'd spend here all day. And I don't think anyone has that kind of time. So this is just a quick overview of different beans in different countries. Thinking of the Caribbean, I really wanted to introduce this because sometimes we don't think of beans as sweet. We think of beans as savory. And in Dominican Republic, during the holidays, they make habichuelas con dulce, which is, I guess, a version of red kidney beans that is on the sweeter side. So it might be made with coconut milk, cinnamon, raisins. I'm sure every recipe is different, but it's a sweet bean recipe, which I found very fascinating. Moving into Venezuela, if you have heard of arepas, there is a rift between Venezuelans and Colombians who created the arepa. But today I'm highlighting the Venezuelan arepa because there's a filling that goes into arepas that has black beans in it. And they might refer to black beans as caraotas negras, and it's part of a typical dish. So again, black beans used with corn in different ways changes based on the country. We have Brazil. I heard someone in the comments. I don't know if they're Brazilian or the heritage is Brazilian, but maybe they've had feijoada, and this is also a traditional bean and rice dish. But beans might be cooked with beef or parts of the animal, like beef tongue, ears, pig's feet. And it's usually, again, part of a dish where it has rice, cassava, toasted flour, vegetables. So it's more part of a dish as well. Moving into Peru, I really like the variety of beans in Peru because they're different colors. And you see this as guiso de payares and ají amarillo. Ají amarillo is the sauce. The payares are the kinds of beans. And then we also see frijoles canarios, made with, again, a meat dish. So if we see the trend here, a lot of beans are incorporated as part of a dish. They're not necessarily eaten by themselves. And it changes from country to country, even the sauce that they're created in, right? So let's transition into how can we make a difference as dietitians, and what does it mean to have these guidelines around cultural sensitivity, right? The first thing is really thinking of our own implicit bias and challenging it, right? If you see this picture here, it's just for fun, right? We have the devil asking, oh, we shouldn't eat beans, they're full of carbs. But then we have the angel, right, saying beans have actually a lot of nutrients. And you might not have these implicit bias. Your patients might actually come to you with these implicit bias that we also get to help them challenge. And I think also in the nutrition world, there's a misconception that we need to healthify recipes or that we need to adjust recipes to make them quote unquote healthier. And I want to encourage you to try something different. What if we just assumed all cultural foods are inherently nourishing? We don't try to change them. So you'll see in the recipe today, I'm not necessarily changing the recipe, I'm adding to the recipe, or I'm not changing the foundation of the flavors, I'm just adding ingredients to add more nutrients or fiber. So I want to encourage you to think of Latin American recipes or ingredients as already inherently healthy, especially when we're counseling. And when we think of the dietary guidelines for Americans that we all abide by, right, that we counsel by, there is a statement that says that we get to customize and enjoy nutrient-dense food. I'm reading off of it. And make choices based on our personal preferences and cultural traditions. So this is something that's inherently already in the guidelines for Americans. We just get to challenge our bias on how we counsel our patients around it. I have some references at the end, but there was a study done that showed that consuming a half a cup of beans per day resulted in reductions in cholesterol and LDL, total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol compared to placebo. So we know that eating more beans is inherently healthy, and it can be incorporated into someone's diet with proper counseling. The second practice guideline that I want to focus on is how we approach education, right? I know that we all love giving handouts, right? That's my favorite thing. I'm like, hey, at the end of the session, here's some handouts. Hopefully you read them. But we really have to be sensitive to the information that we're providing our patients, right? So are we giving them homework? Are we giving them more work because they have to do research on their own after our session? So I'll give you an example. In today's talk, we're talking about fiber. If we were to give a fiber handout that doesn't include any cultural foods that our patients can relate to, they're more than likely not follow any of those guidelines. But if we were to give them a handout that shows some of their cultural foods, they're more likely to follow through and actually put in some of those guidelines into their diet, into their life. And they have done research on this. There's a research study called Que Sabrosa Vida that showed that the encouragement of bean consumption and heritage retention actually overall helped people add more fiber to their diet. So they encouraged all these mothers in the study to eat their cultural foods, and unknowingly, they ended up eating more fiber just by encouraging the moms to eat their cultural foods. So we not only see it in practice, we also see it in research. And what I'm asking you is not to sit down and learn everything you have to know about every single culture out there, because that would be impossible, right? Even myself, you know, I'm Mexican, but I don't know all the different kinds of region of Mexican food, right? I probably will never know. So we get to show ourselves grace, we get to be kind to ourselves, and we get to be open and really check in with our assumptions in our counseling sessions. But we want to create an environment where our patients feel safe to share this with us, right? And I know we all care about person-centered care, but really sitting down and in that diet recall and trying to understand what their intake looks like and what foods they're currently eating that have fiber that we can encourage them to eat. So we're not giving them a foreign list. We're just encouraging them to eat foods that they're familiar with that already have a lot of nutrition value. Oh, finally, the comments here. I'm seeing them now. I'm seeing all the bean comments come in. Thank you for commenting. Going into our last practice guideline, and here I have a fun question for everyone, right? When we think of my plate, we also get to really understand how we're interpreting it. So looking at these plates, I'm going to ask you, when we think of my plate, portion sizes, which one of these pictures do you think best exemplifies my plate? We'll give maybe 60 seconds to vote. I'm making this challenging, right? This is not a right or wrong answer. Like, this is just meant to get you thinking. Hi, Jacqueline from Mexico. Yay! Paisana. I'm getting a lot of comments about the poll. If we can pull it up again, it seems like some people didn't get access to the poll. Yeah, so the different options that we have is pozole, bandeja paisa, lentejas con carne. So I want to hear if you don't have the poll, you can always comment in the box. If you were to look at these pictures and diet recall, which one do you think best exemplifies my plate? Just from initial view, right? We haven't interviewed the patient. We're just looking at the pictures. Oh, I think the poll is working now. So I see a lot of people voted for pozole, which is a Mexican dish, if we're not familiar with it. But I see a couple more comments come in. A and C. Okay. And this is where poll quizzes. Okay, that's coming up again. All right. So this is where we really get to think through, how are we, again, being biased? How are we interpreting my plate? And how can we provide the best counseling, right? So if we're thinking about beans and fiber, all these dishes have a version of fiber and some kind of legumes, right? Or grain. And initially, the pozole has a lot of vegetables on top. So it's easy to visualize that, right? It has radishes, it has lettuce, it has different kinds of vegetables. The center, the bandeja paisa, the only kind of produce that we see is avocado, right? But we don't know if the beans were cooked with vegetables. We don't know if the rice might have vegetables in there, like onions or peppers. And then going to the lentejas con carne, we can see some maybe cilantro, some carrots, but we don't know if the bottom maybe has cooked cabbage, right? I'm just making this up. So it's important that we not only just look at pictures to rely on someone's diet recall, that we really ask further questions, right? How do you cook the lentejas? How do you cook the lentils? I saw that you added carrots to the lentils. What are your thoughts on adding more carrots next time so we could get more produce? I see that you added lentils. Do you also add beans to this recipe? So really tailoring our questions in an open-ended fashion, like we know, but to delve deeper into someone's cooking preparations, delving deeper into their food preferences, so we can understand if they are following my plate guidelines. We can't really just face value say, oh, this is wrong, you should be doing this. There isn't cooked broccoli on the side, right? We really have to tailor our nutrition counseling to what people feel comfortable eating or what ingredients they're using in their dishes. So thank you for going through the questions with me. I just wanted to make it fun. But let's transition into our recipes. So today I'll be making 2 different recipes, and I'm sorry I'm biased. I'm gonna make Mexican food because that's what I love. And it was Mexican Independence Day yesterday, so we had to do Mexican food, right? I'm going to take a moment to stop sharing my screen and transition to my phone camera because I feel we get a better view of my kitchen and what we're doing then. I'll be making tlacoyos de haba and enfrijoladas de queso y espinaca. So let me stop sharing my screen and I'm going to transition to my phone. So bear with me for a second while we move my camera. Okay, I'm going to log out here. Okay, does this work? Okay, did this work? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yay! All right, we did that rather smooth. Sometimes it doesn't go this smooth, so this is great. All right, so like I mentioned, we will be making 2 different. Let me just make sure. I can't really see everyone's comments, so if someone has any questions, I might need assistance reading them off.
We'll have time for Q&A at the end.
Oh, yes.
as well.
Sorry, Q&A at the end. Yes. Like I mentioned, we're going to be making tlacoyo, so we'll go through that recipe first. And I have all my ingredients here. So the base of tlacoyos is some kind of corn masa. Traditionally, you will take your corn, right, that you just got from your field and grind that at the local grinder. Or if you have a grinder at home, you grind your own corn. You can use any kind of stone device, or you use an actual corn grinder. But we have the convenience of buying the cornmeal already made. And to make the tlacoyos, all you're doing is mixing it with water and salt, and you're forming your own tlacoyos. Now, I know in different Mexican restaurants here in the US, we know tacos, right? We know sopes, maybe. Does that sound familiar? We maybe know huaraches, right? So all of these have a similar base, right? Corn and beans. So I decided to show you a different version of corn and beans. And in Mexican cuisine, we have a triad, right? We say this is like the holy triad, which is corn, beans, and chiles. So we're going to make two different dishes that have this triad, basically. So I have some uncooked tlacoyos to show you the filling. So the dough that I just showed you is going to be formed in this football shape. And I also brought blue corn from Mexico, but you could also buy it online here to show you that products can be made with different kinds of corn, not just white or yellow corn. We can also have blue corn. And the filling is can be beans, or in this case, it's habas, which it's kind of like a lima bean, sort of, if I were to describe it. So making the puree is done separate, and you make the filling for your football-shaped masa. Now, this might seem pretty simple, but ideally we're making a lot of these. So I have a lot of different ones that I tend to freeze and save for later. So you can freeze this if you make a lot of them. And what I really enjoy about this recipe is that it can be deep fried, right? If you're working with someone and they make this dish, you could fry them with a lot of oil, or we can just use a comal. So a comal is like a flatter pan that has a shorter lip, and it allows for that brown crust to form without adding any of the extra oil. So I already have some here cooked through for us to assemble, because we're making two recipes and I want to make sure I have enough time. But I really wanted you to understand kind of the process of how we're cooking this, right? So going through plating the tlacoyos, and I didn't mention this, but the tlacoyos can really be eaten any time of day. If you wanted one for breakfast, if you wanted one for lunch, dinner, midnight, there's no time of day, a good time of day or bad time of day to eat this. And if we think of the combination of fiber, right, we get it from our beans, we get some from the corn, but the toppings that are typically added to this are also high in fiber, right? So I have my salsa that I made earlier, but then I also have a cactus or nopal salsa. So nopal is basically a large cactus leaf. Are they called leaves, right? Cactus. And it has a texture of okra if you've never had it. I have found it in supermarkets here in the US, more Hispanic markets or smaller stores. But you can also get it in jars, pickled. And I will say the texture of okra, it is like that almost like gooey texture that comes from okra. Oh, thank you. Someone said cactus pads. Cactus paddle. That makes a lot of sense. Yes. So the recipe has tomatoes, onion, cilantro, and the cactus cut up. I would rarely use raw cactus. I usually cook it ahead of time and I make the salsa. So we already have our base, right? This is our corn, beans, or habas. And traditionally we add our nopalito salsa, right? This is optional. I've seen people just eat it as is. I've seen people add a fried egg. I've seen people add just cheese. So I do have a queso fresco here, which if I were to compare queso fresco to something found in the US, I would say it's maybe similar to feta because it does have a saltiness and nature and it crumbles very easily. So here we have our traditional tlacoyo. And what I love about it is that it also has all the colors from the Mexican flag, right? It has green, red, white. So we can make several of these. And again, the toppings can change. So in your counseling sessions, you can always ask someone if they're frying it, if they're using what's called a comal with little to no oil, what toppings they're putting on it. So we have a lot of opportunities to counsel our patients or to prepare this ourselves with higher nutrients or higher fiber, right? I do want to give a chance if there's, I did see a question about the recipe. The plan, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, is to send out the recipe with the CEU, or everyone's going to get an email at the end with the recipe, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot my salsa. All right. Look at that. Okay, perfect. Let's transition to our second recipe. This, I'm going to take you through more steps because I did a lot of the prep for this ahead of time. And like I said, I usually make a bunch of these. I put them in a Ziploc bag and I freeze it so they last a long time. But let's transition to our second recipe, which is going to be enfrijoladas. So I know a lot of us have heard of enchiladas, right? You can give me a little hands up in the chat who's heard of enchiladas. Yeah, okay. So this is a similar version to enchiladas, but we're using beans as the base. Before I get started with the ingredients, enfrijoladas can change from state to state, right? Today I will be using black beans. I think black beans are more well known in Oaxaca, which is a state in Mexico. Where I'm from, you use more red beans as a part of this dish. So if you find recipes online or if you eat this at a restaurant, the beans used are going to be different. The chilies used are going to be different as well. So I'm going to turn on my stove so that way it'll make a lot of this easier for me. And if someone wants to come to my house later and eat this, let me know. You're all invited. Like I mentioned, we're going to start making the sauce. And I'm using black beans, but depending on the state of Mexico, you'll use something different. And you can use canned beans, right? We can make this even more convenient. I also saved the bean broth. You can use water, you can use chicken stock, and I'm using a 1-to-1 ratio. So for 2 cups of beans, I'm using 2 cups of broth. We can always add more later. For seasonings, I'm using a chile pasilla and I'm choosing chile morita. These were originally dried. I buy them in these packages. And I would recommend not blending it dry because it's not going to blend properly. So we have 2 options. You can either boil them, right, in the beans when you're cooking beans. You can boil them with just water. Another traditional way of rehydrating the beans is with oil. Now, if you're counseling someone, this is a key point to ask. Do we rehydrate our beans with oil? Do we fry them? Or do we rehydrate them with water? Because as we know, the added oils can increase calories, or if someone has concerns for heart health, they might want to limit fats. So this is a key point to bring up in your counseling sessions. If you don't have access to dried chilies, they sell canned chipotle. This also offers like a smoky taste. You can always use this as a replacement as well. Someone said rehydrate. What did I say? Did I say hydrate? Rehydrate. When English is your second language, some words don't come out as well. So I appreciate everyone's patience. Now, in a lot of Mexican cuisine, you're not really going to season with pepper or cumin. I see that a lot in different recipes that are more like Tex-Mex oriented. So I'm just adding a little bit of salt. We'll adjust our seasoning later. And I'm going to give you a secret to Mexican cooking. It's finding different herbs. So if you're not familiar, there is such a thing as Mexican oregano, but I'll be using epazote, which is also a herb that is mostly used fresh, but I'm going to be using the dried version today. And you only need a little bit. It's very well scented, and it'll just bring the dish a lot of different aromas and taste and flavors. So if you ever see that at the grocery, I would recommend getting it. I will also be adding 1 clove of garlic that has been caramelized or browned, and half of a small onion. So all of this goes in there, and we're going to blend it. The herb that I used is called epazote. Oh, I didn't have my chilies. Oh my gosh. I've seen it again at Hispanic grocery stores. You can find it. I saw a lady on Facebook Marketplace that was selling it, but I didn't know if I trusted her and wanted to go to her house to buy a sketchy plant. But if you find that way, that works too. Oh, last thing. So I used chicken broth, but I'm going to also show you a trick to Mexican cuisine that no one's going to tell you. It's adding the nor powder. I will say this is the Mexican version of MSG to Asian food, right? So this is added to a lot of sauces, a lot of even cooked dishes to add additional flavor. Now, if you're counseling someone that's concerned about sodium, they do make a low sodium version of this. If they use it a lot in their cooking, that's another point that you can bring up in your sessions as well. All right, so let's get blending. And while I'm blending, it is going to make a little bit of noise. So this is a great time to put some questions in the chat if you've thought of anything. All right. All right, I think it's looking really well blended. I just, what kind of blender? You can use any blender. With the dried chilies though, I find that a high power blender does better. But honestly, whatever you have at home is fine. So I'm going to heat this up in a pan. Another key point, a lot of times, a lot of oil is used in this step of adding oil to the pan before the bean sauce is added. So this is where you get to delve a little bit deeper, right? Are we adding oil to the pan? I'm not adding any oil because it's not really going to stick. It's a sauce. And if you notice, it's very much liquid, but it still has some thickness to it because of the beans, right? It coats the spoon. So if you notice, it doesn't completely drip off of the spoon. It has a couple seconds that it comes down. And I'm heating this up to a boil, right? So it's going to hang out there for a little bit. I did see a quick question about the herb that I used. You could replace it with oregano, dried oregano. It's optional, right? So if you go to a different state, they might not even use this herb. So it's completely optional, right? You don't have to use it. While this is heating up, I'm also heating up my comal. And I have store-bought tortillas. And you can make your own tortillas. But for this recipe, I do ask you to use corn. I've never seen this recipe made with flour tortillas, so please use corn. And I'm using the comal, but in a traditional recipe, these would be fried in oil. So again, you're asking, like, do you typically fry the tortilla before you put the sauce in it? If people look for some texture because the tortilla gets crunchy before we add it into the sauce, I would recommend getting some kind of spray oil because that coats the whole tortilla and it allows to create that crunchy texture without actually deep frying it. So I want to heat it up first before we go in and add the tortillas. I'm actually going to cover this so it goes a little bit faster into our boiling phase. Now let's talk about filling. So I'm going to use queso blanco. You can also use the same queso fresco that we used earlier in the same recipe for the filling. And again, thinking of addition, I mentioned this earlier, if you remember, I cooked up some spinach with onions, and I'm going to add this with the cheese as part of the filling for the enfrijoladas. Traditionally, you could also find chicken. You can find different kinds of sausages like chorizo or longaniza. which are typically high in fat. Sometimes you'll just find cheese, or I've also had them without any filling. So it's important to ask questions, not just, are we cooking in frijoladas? What kind of filling is being used? Can we add different things to the filling without altering the recipe? So my comal is pretty hot. So if you notice, I'm just spraying both sides and putting it on the pan because I do want some of the texture, right? So if you ask me, if we're deep frying versus spraying with oil, the spray has a little less calories, or we're managing the amount of fat that's being used without sacrificing on the texture or the flavor that can come from the tortillas. Okay. So we're gonna wait for this to boil. I'm waiting for my tortillas to get crunchy, and it's going to be a relatively quick process. So I'm just gonna walk you through how we're going to assemble this while things are heating up. I'm going to grab one tortilla. I'm going to dip it in the bean sauce, put it on the plate, put our filling, fold it in half. You can fold it in half like a quesadilla, sort of. You can fold it in thirds, so it looks more like a round taco, sort of, on the plate. This allows you to be creative as well if you're making this in your own home. And after they're filled and served, you can add whatever topping you want, right? Typically it's more cheese, because cheese is wonderful, right? You can add avocado, you can add cilantro, you can add onion, whatever topping is appropriate. I do see some comments come in, and I want to make sure we honor people's questions. So I will, we can answer them at the end. But I do have a little bit of time because I'm waiting for things to cook. Oh, look, we're boiling already. This is great. All right, so we are almost at the point where we're going to assemble. We should probably do a taste test, right? It's not that spicy for my taste. I feel the dried chilies that we use today are more smoky than they are spicy. If you wanted to make this spicy, I would suggest maybe chile de árbol. That's also a dried chili that adds more spice. But the chilies we use today are more for the smokiness of the dryness that they bring to the dish. All right, so our tortillas are heating up. And if we're ready, we're going to go ahead and assemble. I do see some questions. I guess we'll answer questions at the end. I don't want to take up too much time from the class because we have another presenter. So the chilies that I used, I will answer that. I used chile pasilla and chile morita. They're both dried. And again, these two chilies are more smoky in nature than they are spicy. Also, a trick that I found with tortillas from the US that are from a grocery store, I'll get a moist towel and keep them in the moist towel so they don't break apart. You can also microwave them if that helps soften them. All right, are we ready to assemble? This is the fun part, yay. So I'm basically grabbing my tortilla, dipping it in the bean sauce, getting that fully covered. And again, for my filling, I'm just adding a little bit of the spinach, and I'm adding a little bit of my cheese. And then we fold it, again, into whatever shape makes sense for you. I personally like this dipping method because it prevents us from getting too much sauce to the point that the tortilla falls apart. We still want to have the integrity of the dish. We don't want it to be falling apart. So I'm adding the cheese and spinach again, and I'm only going to make 3 for the purposes of today's demonstration. All right. Now, if you think of the nutrition value to this, right, you might think that there isn't that much protein. And we have protein from the cheese, the beans, but I will say this dish traditionally is eaten during Lent. Mexican culture being mostly Catholic because they were conquered by Spain, you're going to see a lot of foods being adjusted based on religious holidays. So this dish usually is eaten during that time of year, but really, again, this dish can be eaten during breakfast, lunch, dinner. There's no time of day where this dish doesn't make sense. So going into our toppings, I'm just adding a little bit of that queso fresco. You could also add queso cotija. It's another kind of cheese. I will say that cheese is more similar to Parmesan cheese or Asiago cheese. Like it's a little bit more dry than it is like queso fresco. So this is our final dish in frijoladas. Trying to clean it up here so it doesn't look like messy. But yes, so again, we get to create our own version of this, ask our patients how they cook it. And traditionally we're eating this with a fork and knife. I think if we ate it with our hands, it would be a little messy, but you can. I don't want to take away from anyone's experience. So these are our two recipes, right? I'm going to bring back our tlacoyo, filled with beans, topped with nopalito salsa. And then we have our enfrijoladas, which are filled with spinach, cheese, and topped with more cheese. And I added a little cilantro for color. All right, well, thank you so much for being part of today's class. And I'm going to pass it on to the next presenter. And at the end, we will answer all the questions. So please hold on to your questions. We will answer them at the end. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Sylvia Klinger here, broadcasting from Chicago, Illinois. We're going to transition a little bit into grains now and what the part is another high fiber food into the Latin diet. Let's see here. All right, these are my disclosures, but I want to assure you that everything I have to bring you today have no conflict of interest. Now, we've heard about grains, and so much has happened within the last decade in regards to grains, and all the noise has been going around, which ones to eat, which ones give me weight, should I eat them at certain times, what's the variety that I need, avoid them. There's so much information, and a lot of it is conflicting information when it comes to grains. But I want to show you that grains need to be part of your diet, especially when it comes to whole grains, because they provide that fiber that we need so much and that we do not get. Now, I want to bring out to the dietary guidelines, because these dietary guidelines for Americans give us the guidelines that we need to follow every day. And we know that we need to meet our nutritional needs with a variety of foods and beverages that are have a good nutritional value. Variety always brings you lots of the nutrients that you need. And also they emphasize that half of your grain minimum should come from whole grains. And of course, when it comes to not only the Latinos, but also the whole population, we need to pay attention to portion sizes and not to neglect that culturally, we need to make sure that we can make these recommendations specifically individually for the different populations. And that's what makes it sometimes challenging, because as Rebecca was saying, there are so many differences from country to country. Imagine beans and rice, that it's our foundation, and you look at how different they are. And she didn't even go into the fact that, there's many other foods that they're eating also, they are different from country to country. But when it even comes to rice and beans that we all share, we see the differences in how we prepare them. So that's important. I want to just have one poll question here in the beginning. And so again, just to reemphasize, according to the 2020-25 dietary guidelines for Americans, what is the minimum whole grain intake recommendations for adults? You have 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 3 ounce, 4 ounce. We kind of give you here a couple more seconds. And if we can bring the answer, that would be great. Yes. All right. So we know that there's 6 servings, every day for that is every day for about 4 ounces. So we have about 6 servings every day of grains, and half of that. So about, it's the recommendations for whole grains. Okay. And according to the most recent dietary guidelines, again, I want to emphasize that carbohydrates should make about 45 to 65% of the daily calories. So as you know, this is the majority of our calories should come from carbohydrates, and half of those needs to come from whole, minimum needs to come from, you can make them all whole grain, or you can also include a few of, the 45, and we'll get into that in a minute. But whole grains is important because we know that the majority of population are not getting enough of the recommendations. Now, there's a connection here. The food equals connection. So there is some synergies here, and food is one of the most meaningful ways people express their cultural identity. And when it comes to Latinos, food is everything. It means love. It means that I care for you. It means I want to feed you. It means that I'm going to give you everything you desire when it comes to food. It just, there's a connection. There's a bond when it comes to food and culture. And we need to be very mindful of that. And especially when we're counseling our patients. And let's talk about rice, because there's been a lot of controversies about, what rice to recommend to Latinos. And of course, we want to make sure that we honor our culture. We want to make sure we honor the things that we are raised with that culturally make more sense for us. And when it comes to rice, that's one of those things. Rice is something that is part of everybody's diet as you see it. And, but we also have to understand that we can kind of influence them a little bit into the other side as well. Think about when you're eating your hamburgers. How many people will have them with whole, be a whole grain bun? Again, when you think about a hamburger, you'll always think of a fortified bread that, bun bread that is, in your hamburger. But that doesn't mean that you cannot find a really delicious whole grain bun to do your burgers as well, and introduce that to your guests, your family, etc. But the same thing goes with when it comes to rice. Of course, we are like 90% uses of white rice in Latin America. But know that when we actually introduce them and introduce ways that really taste really good, like adding vegetable broth or adding chicken broth or adding some kind of, other seasonings, and adding vegetables to season it, it really becomes a really delicious dish as well when you make it with rice. And, let's say when you go to a restaurant and they have available brown rice, give it a try, because that nutty flavor and the way that a lot of chefs prepare it is absolutely delicious. So I would recommend that, even though, white rice is our first option when it comes to Latinos, adding brown rice could be a great addition. And know that recent research has shown that people who eat brown rice actually pair it with more vegetables and actually have, kind of like sets them in the right path when it comes to nutrition. Now, overall, the contribution of whole grains to the total grain intake, it's lower among men versus women. And we know that it's much lower also in Hispanic adults in compared to white non-Hispanics, or non-Hispanic Black, or non-Hispanic Asian. Okay, so we have one of the lowest. Now, the good news is that, well, sort of good news, there is a gap, the gap is being widening, but at the same time, it's good to know that Hispanics are actually, skewing into eating a little bit more of the whole grains than the rest of the population. As you can see in this graph here, there was a big dip in the, of course, the late 90s to the 2000, early 2000. Can you remember what happened? Can you put it in the chat? Something happened during that time, and that was the diet, the low carb craze diets came into place that really dipped heavily the consumption of carbohydrates. And it was really, for me, it was very heartbreaking, because something that could provide, especially whole grains, it could provide, for heart health, to prevent cancers, to prevent, to manage diabetes and all these chronic disease. It was really heartbreaking to see the people trying to avoid carbohydrates. When, my take is always, the ones that you need to be aware, mindful, are the ones that have added sugars, lots of sodium, and lots of saturated fats. Those are the carbohydrate combinations, as I call it, that need to be, that are in another category. Now, motivation. I spent lots of time motivating people how to eat healthy, including my very own family. Every day, my husband, who grew up, eating, very little vegetables in his life. It's always been a process to continue to introduce him to more fruits and vegetables, especially vegetables. But one of the things that I have learned is that offering a variety of grains, and again, making them delicious. And to make them delicious, you don't have to do too much to it. It's just boiling them in some vegetables, especially onions and garlic, and making them, combining them on bowls or different options with other things, with meat or vegetarian options, fish, whatever. Those are things that are gonna be enticing for people to try them more. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, cutting them. I mean, we have research that says when you cut your fruits and vegetables, it's gonna make people eat them, especially the younger population. Role modeling, I can't say enough. My son was a real picky eater, and I remember, just like, of course, I love to cook and enjoy foods. And for me, it was like always sitting at the table. I couldn't help myself to really say, oh, how wonderful these days, and how delicious and how crunchy. And, the voices came around from other people who were eating at the table as well. And eventually it's like, okay, I'll give it a try. I mean, the other day I had broccolini, and I don't know if I made broccolini too many times, because, that's not a Hispanic vegetable, but I made broccolini because I feel that it's a really tasty vegetable. And my son came for dinner, and he was like, I put him one spear, and he's like, I said, you want another one? You want another one? He took 3 spears, and he absolutely loved it. He's like, what was the name of that again? Broccolini. Anyways, it's something that, as you present these to them in different ways, even when it comes to pastas and rice, you put it in there. I don't even tell them sometimes that pasta is whole grain. So that, see what they say, if they even find any difference, because of course the seasonings are going to be a little bit more overwhelming in there. But involve them in the planning. I love involving them in the planning, in the shopping, in the cooking, preparation, and even when it comes to eating at the table, especially, this is month of family meals. And what a better thing to try these recipes and incorporate some of these nutritious foods into a meal and have them all sitting at the table, so that we can reap the benefits, not only for better nutrition, for better academics, behaviors, etc., that are going to be great benefits when you sit at the table and enjoy these grains and delicious foods. The nutritional value of the popular ingredients in the Latin diet is they're amazing. Corn, of course, as you saw today with Rebecca, corn is like the cornerstone of, I was in Colombia last week, and everything is corn, and the corn kernels are huge in Colombia. You see the corn in the cup, the kernels are very, very large. And I have never seen a corn in the cup with kernels that were so large. And immediately I was like, oh, I want to try one of those. And it was delicious, delicious. Not as sweet as my corn from the Midwest that I absolutely love, but this corn it tasted like popcorn. It was really, really good. So corn, of course, and sweet potatoes and plantains are part of our diet. And those are all great, high in fiber, whole grain, great sources of B vitamins and minerals. So we love to include the grains and these other vegetables that are high in fiber in our diet, and that we love to incorporate. Again, when it comes to motivating and adding healthy modifications, it's about really, I would say, just incorporating them here and there, because we don't want to mess up with abuelita's recipe or tia's recipe. But, once in a while, whenever we see an opportunity to add more beans or to include some of these recipes that are so delicious, like those enfrijoladas. I mean, I wanted to run and make some today. So, incorporating beans that are so loved into our cuisine, and beans, and we have a variety of beans. It's from black beans, red beans, the pigeon peas, the lentils, all these, legumes and beans that we can incorporate and that we absolutely love. Again, it's just adding, a little bit more cilantro, onions, garlic, carrots, and the flavors are just gonna, really become very powerful. Portion control is something that we always have to be very mindful, because sometimes we think, well, if it's a good thing, I can just kind of pile it up in my plate. And this is why I always love to serve people in a small plate with a small cup. And that kind of, without even thinking of, a diet or anything, I'm helping people eat a little bit less. When it comes to dairy, sometimes we feel that, a lot of my patients tell me, well, if it's low fat or non-fat, does it have the same nutrients? People think that the non-fat milk is completely diluted, and it's like, the total opposite. It's got the same nutrients, you're just getting rid of, with the exception of the fat, the saturated fat. But we want to emphasize that the low-fat versions and the non-fat versions have the same nutrients. Fresh salsas. Oh, I could just give a whole class on salsas, because I think that's really the essence of cuisine. No matter what country you go to, the salsas they serve you with it, whether it be Asian, a teriyaki salsa or a sauce, or you're talking about, when you go to Mexico, the salsas, so you go to Puerto Rico, sofrito, South America, the chimichurri, these salsas that are filled with flavor, not, they add a lot of flavor, but at the same time, they add a lot of color and a boost of nutrients as well. So, they are, I could say, you can blend them with just a couple ingredients, 2-3 ingredients, you have a great salsa that it could really boost the nutritional value, at the same time, the flavors in that meal. And when it comes to whole grains, of course, remember that they provide us that fiber, and it start with every meal. Try to have a whole grain with every meal, because sometimes, we tend to eat them at breakfast and then we forget that we can also include them later. Even with our corn tortilla, which also is made of a whole grain as well. So remember that they include, they have great nutrients aside from fiber of folate, iron, magnesium, and that, as we were talking earlier about 45 grains, know that there is room for like pastas and breads and pretzels and things like that, and rice that are 45. And they also have folic acid and other great nutrients as well, the B vitamins as well. Just remember that the ones that we need to be mindful that are not in the same category of rice, pastas, and bread and crackers are the ones that have high amounts of sugar, sodium, and saturated fats, like the donuts, the pan dulces, los pastries, all those things that could be also add up a lot of the calories. Now let's talk about some of these ingredients, other grains that are very popular in our cuisine. Aside from the corn that we have talked about, amaranth is also another kind of grainy, nutty grain that is used a lot in Latin America. I was trying to look for some the other day and I could not find any around me, but this amaranth is kind of like a light brownish color, as you can see here in the picture, and it's really it's used in Mexico to make hot beverages. And, you have atole with corn or corn maze, but this amaranth is used maybe like in the south part of Mexico to make champurrado and other hot beverages like that are very delicious. But like I said, it's got a nice aroma, and it's kind of like grainy. So you have to kind of mix it up, because it might have some settlement at the bottom. Quinoa, is another grain that it's a pseudo grain. So it's not really like a grain, but it's considered, people eat it as grains. It's high in protein, and it's in South America a lot. It's not.
Sylvia, it looks like your connection is buffering.
make this, salad with jicama, mango, and at the same time, try to, incorporate something that, I think you're gonna love in that quinoa or any other ingredients. It could be brown rice, it could be anything like that as well. So these are, great grains that are used in our cuisine. But can you think of other grains, if you want to put them in the chat, any other grains that if you're Latino and your family eats them and you're, because, Latin America is very big and there might be other grains in there. And I can't quite see your answers here, but, keep them coming. I want to hear them all, and I want to see what are the grains you consume at home that are also, part of your Latin American diet as well. But there's others here, the barley, of course, rice. We know that rice, what's interesting about rice is that it could be the short grain or the long grain or the medium grain. We know in the Caribbean, the short grain is very popular. I even have it ordered, or I bring it in a suitcase every time I go to Puerto Rico, because it is it's just a great grain to have. And it just cooks a little faster, and our dishes in Puerto Rico, sort of like go with that short grain. Now, if you're from Mexico, and I was born in Puerto Rico, but I was raised in Mexico. I lived there for 10 years with my parents when I was a little girl, and up until 18 years old. So it was something that I also learned to eat the long grain rice, which is very popular in Mexico. But wheat, there is wheat is used in Latin America, as well as barley are other grains that are also used in our cuisine as well, for either soups or breads, or like the flour tortillas and etc. I'm going to just show you here with the few minutes I have left, some of the dishes and how delicious all these grains can be part of our cuisine. And I would recommend, if you're not Latino, go in and try to explore a little bit more of this, how to utilize these whole grains into your diet, these great grains that add a lot of flavor and all that fiber and nutrients. So with corn, it could be an atole, it could be a cornmeal in the morning. Very popular to have corn in the morning. But again, corn is everything. It could be from arepas, could be pupusas from El Salvador, could be la maicenita, whatever, the cornmeal that we have in Puerto Rico in the morning. It could be cornbread. It could be so many things with corn that it's really, like I say, a grain that we use quite a bit in Latin America. The amaranth also could be also used for dishes, as well, as you see in this dish as well. So not only hot beverages as we usually use it, but also know that it could be used into recipes as well. The wheat, of course, this is empanadas. Every time I go to Puerto Rico, I have to have an empanada with, and I love teaching people how to make them and fill them with veggies, some cheese, or with beans. It just, we can create many things. I think the other day I was making this a really interesting filling with tofu and spinach, and it was delicious. And somebody was like, that would be, one was in Colombia, and somebody was saying that would be a great filling for empanadas. So like I said, it's just really interesting to experiment with, using our typical foods and maybe adding a little twist of fusion from another cuisine. And I think, as Latinos, we love to eat and we love to experiment. So it's a great way to introduce them to other grains. The rice, of course, we use rice, every country uses rice, almost every country, and we use it from soups to dishes, to salads, to you name it. And like, like the Cubans, sometimes they make these little balls. It's, many uses for rice. And it's a great way when you use them in recipes to use the brown rice, because I think most people will find that texture to be really, really delicious. It's not going to be mushy. It's going to be nice and hearty. I'm going to give you some resources here from Always, the Whole Grains Council, Wheat Council, My Plate. We have developed many recipes also, myself personally, some recipes for My Plate. I love to, bring some more cultural recipes. So hopefully we'll get to see those in the next few months. And also there's, this dietary guidelines that also sets the standards for how, you know, how many portions we need and what are the combinations that we need, but know that we need to acculturate them. We need to really ask the questions and really incorporate what they love and making them make sure that mindfully they have the right portions and the right recommendations for the ingredients and the nutrients that they need. Here's some more references of some of the research that I talked about in here. And I love to connect with all of you. Here's my social media handles. I love to talk more about the Latin cuisine. So if any questions you might have, you know, bring them up now. We have a few minutes, 5 minutes left. I want to turn it over back to Kelly to kind of lead us through the questions that we have. But please connect with me at any point. I'll be happy to keep this conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you both. This was so awesome. I think, you know, perfect for Hispanic Heritage Month for us to think about what we can all learn from these traditional foodways, especially when it comes to trying to get more fiber in the diet. And I think, you know, everyone has something to learn from what we have here. So there was a question that came up a few times. It was about any tips for counseling those with type 2 diabetes and food modifications while still incorporating traditional foods like beans, rice, and tortillas. So maybe I would love to get both of your takes on that. So Sylvia, if you could go first and talk about kind of how you approach that conversation with someone who does have diabetes.
Yes, and diabetes is extremely prevalent among Latinos, especially Puerto Ricans. My first go-to is the fiber. I always say, you know, beans have the fiber. If you have whole grain rice, whole grain breads, you know, I mean, again, always knowing that there's other factors as well when it comes to diabetes, like, you know, maybe they're overweight, maybe there is, you know, the portions are very large, maybe they're not eating enough vegetables, which happens a lot. So it's kind of like taking into that consideration. But I always say fiber is important, especially when it comes to carbohydrates, because people think, oh, I cannot have beans, I cannot have whole grains, I cannot have fruits. And that's, you know, the opposite. You know, that's the carbohydrates that in diabetes management that we need, but we need to make sure that they have the fiber they need to manage that blood sugars better. So the whole grains, you know, play a big part, but at the same time, you know, go exercise, go walking after your meal, make sure that you balance it out with, you know, more vegetables in your plate, etc. So there's all these little things, you know, that are my go-tos when somebody with diabetes needs to really think about how they're going to eat their carbohydrates.
That was great. I'm trying to think of something that I agree with what you're saying. So I'm trying to think of something a little different. I think it's always important to meet people where they're at, because I have someone that their first visit was like, I don't care what you're going to tell me, but I'm still going to eat tortillas. And that's that. Like, so we have to meet people where they're at in their diabetes journey. I know some people may have more urgency, right? If, you know, they need to be on insulin, and we're educating them on like insulin management as well. But I would say meeting people where they're at, especially if all of this is new to them. And the other thing I like to throw out with Latin American community, where we're very much known for trying random things. So I find that the diabetic patients that I work with now that are transitioning to taking a medication, they're like, oh, but I'm doing this juice diet that my cousin told me that helps. So I will say that it's important to get a accurate diet history with anything that they're trying that's unconventional related to their diabetes diagnosis, and then meeting them where they're at, right? So if they have foods that are deal breakers for them, like they don't want to give up and this is part of who they are as their identity, then working with them, right? Like, okay, we're gonna have tortillas, but instead of 4, let's have 2. So that brings me to portion sizes. How can we manage someone's desires around what they enjoy eating and the portion size? And let's say someone loves tortillas, but they don't like rice. Well, then we can negotiate on the rice and having that conversation. Another thing about Latin American population to consider is that mostly the female counterparts are the ones cooking. So you might have to get the whole family involved in the diabetes care, not just the individual, because they might not actually be doing the cooking. So that's my last tip of it's a community-based education, not just individual when it comes to cooking and portion sizes.
Thank you. And I have to say too, like this chat section has been a wealth of information. So I really appreciate you all in the audience sharing your tips and advice as well. I wish we had time for more questions. We did have some questions about the recipes, so I do want to remind everyone that we're going to share those in that email that has the recording and the slides and the CPU certificate. And you've given us lots of ideas for future events. So with that, thank you all. Thank you so much, and keep your eye out on an email from us within the next week. And thank you to Sylvia and Rebecca. Bye.
Thank you.